Hello, welcome. In this lecture, we are starting with the ordinance part of the President of India. So, we have discussed in the previous lecture where we talked about the veto powers. So, like we discussed the veto powers, we'll understand today about the ordinance part. Now, ordinance part is a very important topic under the President of India. So, we'll be discussing each and every point pertaining to it. Let's get started. The first thing that we have to understand is that we're talking about what article? It is Article 123 of the Constitution of India. So, Article 123 talks about what? It empowers who? It empowers the President of India to, the term is very important, to what? To promulgate, to promulgate ordinances. To promulgate ordinances, especially during what? During the recess of Parliament. Very important. You have to remember these words that I'm using here. For instance, you have to remember the word promulgate. Promulgate in the sense that he will issue, right? Issue an ordinance during the recess of the Parliament. So this recess of the Parliament is something very important. And you see, when I'm using the word Parliament, this is of course that I'm talking about both the houses of the Parliament, that is the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. So that is forgiven. So the first thing that you've understood up till now is that the president is empowered by the Article 123 that he or she is going to promulgate ordinances during the recess of the parliament. This is a very important aspect, right? Now, these ordinances have the same force and effect like an act of the parliament. So let's understand it with the diagram. What have we understood up till now about this entire process of, the passage from a bill to what it becomes an act? You see, the bill is either introduced in the Lok Sabha or it is introduced in the Rajya Sabha. Now, whichever house it is being introduced in, it would have to go to the other house for the assent to, rather for the yes to. Now, let's say both the houses have given their yes to it. What will happen next? Like we discussed, it will go to the president. And when it goes to the president, when he or she will assent this bill, then only it will become an act. If the president assent is not given, the bill will simply refrain from becoming an act. It will only get the status of what? A bill which was initiated by the parliament. Is this clear? So that's very important, what you need to remember. Now, I'm saying here that the ordinance have same force and effect like the act of the parliament. So you see, when the president is going to promulgate this ordinance, that ordinance will have the same force, it will have the same effect like the act of the parliament. Is this clear? These 3 points are rather important. This is the introduction of the ordinances, so very important. Then the third point here talks about temporary laws. Now you see, like I told you, the ordinance will have the same force and effect like that of the act of the parliament, but you have to understand that with this same force and effect, I'm saying it is going to be a temporary law. For instance, the promulgation of the ordinance by the president is not going to be permanent in nature. It is not going to be permanent in nature. On the other hand, this thing here, which when it gets done, this is permanent in nature. So these are the basic points you need to remember about the ordinance part of the President of India. What have we discussed up till now? That this is something which is only going to be practiced during the recess of the parliament. Then the ordinance will have the same force and effect like the act of the parliament, and then it is going to be a temporary law. It is not going to be a permanent one in nature. Now this is the basic introduction about the ordinance part of the President of India. Now I'm saying here this article 123 talks about what? Talks about the legislative part of the president. If this comes in the exam, this is how you need to understand it. I'm talking here about what? About the legislative part. About the legislative part. Why is this important? Why I'm emphasizing on this so much? Because you see, in the previous lecture, when we discussed the veto, I told you that veto is what? It is an executive power. It is an executive power. So we have separately discussed in a lecture about the different powers that have been given to the President of India. We discussed the financial, the executive, the legislative, the judiciary, the military, all of those powers. So this veto is a classic example of the executive power, and ordinance is a classic example of the legislative power. So these are some of the important things that you need to remember. Let me highlight it. So these are the things that you need to remember. This is